Philosophers talk to our times, we citizens of dystopia. One of the things about postmodernism was it undermined or pointed out that reality undermined, or language theory undermined, criteria for truth, which was fine and very dandy. And I always had this worry. I remember when I read the postmodern condition, that the problem was that most people weren't just going to sit down and go, "Oh, truth doesn't really exist and it doesn't matter." Oh no, they were going to use the old method. I mean, the pre-enlightenment method for reinventing truth. For if truth doesn't exist, emotion does. And that's, of course, one of the things that characterizes a dystopia. It does both. A dystopia is a system where emotion, powerful emotion, has long since replaced any notion of truth. And so when you feel a thing to be true, you know it is true. I mean, you can see it. You can see it in the way that, oh God, Musk managed to scam the world again to become a trillionaire, selling the idea, the dream that he was going to set up data processors in space, although exactly what problem that solves, I was never quite sure, and do it very quickly, and that these data processors were going to somehow solve the problem of them being on the world, in spite of the fact you need more solar panels taken up to space than it's ever been done before, an unimaginable number, and a system for cooling down the heat generated by these data processing. Space is cold, absolutely, but you still need to get the heat to the right place in order to radiate out into space. It becomes very complicated. It was clearly just a scam. But the point is, they're just shouting, "Space, space, space!" Looking slightly visionary, and to be honest with you, utterly demented. Brings the boy's own version of truth. The kind of boy's own version of truth that will believe a company will increase its profits by... Now here, I think it was 400%. That sounds reasonable. Although in my mind, I've told myself it's 400-fold, which is not reasonable, in 3 or 4 years, which is just not going to happen on the products they're selling. All of that is just simply an emotive appeal. And the point is about the emotion, is the further it is away from the actual truth, the actual world, the possible world, the more the emotion seems to create the very notion of truth. It creates its own truth. The image of the sci-fi world breaking in, changing everything, becomes a very powerful image. So that it is so that in our post-truth society, it's not just that we use emotion to make truth. It's that emotion has to absolutely challenge our reality. I mean, the actual world of the possible. And put instead the world of the impossible. And the world of the impossible, that with the emotions that it creates, becomes more truth to us than anything else. Oh, it's very Nietzschean. We've fallen in love with a dream. How fiction became reality. I think of in Twilight Titles. Because the idea, the dream of sending data centers up into space or men to Mars, although it's a fact that practically it's not going to happen in hundreds of years, or men to the stars, again, not possible, on our level of technology, or not advisable, or not sensible, becomes more important than any restricted reality in this post-truth world. But it isn't just that the more incredulous the lie, the more idiotic, the more likely it is to win, because the more somehow it breaks our notion of reality, which we no longer really believe in anyway, and somehow that gives it its own truth. What is also the case is that truth and horror have become very, very entangled. In a way that is unfortunate. Because it isn't just the impossible that breaks through and feels like truth now. It is also the utterly disgusting and horrible. And sometimes, certainly those of my persuasion, and if you ask me what makes the left at the moment, it is the adherence to genuine horror and the belief in what we feel to be real horror that is actually happening, that you could send somebody out and report that governments ought to be acting on. I mean Gaza, but Iran. I could list a whole set of things where my anchoring in truth is defined through my reaction of horror. And the politics, therefore, of horror that follow on, the demands that governments do something, not quite sure what, but we've got to do something, whatever we can, to fight this horror. Because the horror has become the truth. That's on my particular wing of politics. Wing, whatever you like to call it, my particular zone of politics, where we want to have our horror defined by a set of actions defined in the Middle East, usually by one or two governments. It's interesting, we're not so worried about governments in Sudan traditionally, or governments in the back of beyond that we haven't heard of. It's always the Middle East in our particular version of the horror. But that is a wider policy, that horror as much as fantasy has become the criteria for truth. You can see it very, very clearly in the reality that is funding the share offers for AI. AI, you see, has been trying to convince us of its truth, of its ability to become a Cylon-like power and revolutionize the world, destroy humanity. As if our fear of it, our fear that it will take every single job in the world, become the new doctors. As an aside, it's only a country as broken as Britain or America that would really confuse AI with doctors. Here in France, you have a half-hour consultation with your doctor, who really quite listens rather well and has got the time to do it. It would be very difficult to replace that sort of human interaction with AI. Just saying. So that if you feel that your doctors could be replaced by AI, that's a failure of the healthcare system. That's a total point in passing. But I suddenly realised why I'm so against it. It's just because I live in a system where you get half an hour with your doctor. Right. But the point is about the entire sales pitch of AI is that it's been a horror show. People have been told their jobs are coming for them. They've been told that humans are on the verge of destruction. Now, it's interesting about this horror show, of course, that it hides the other horror show. It doesn't talk so much about the way data is being stripped. Actually, there is probably a horror show, but then you can see, again, here I am revealing my left-wing bias. The fact that I choose a different section of horror to the one that I'm being handed directly by the mainstream media and the people with the money. I choose a separate set of horrors. Just pointing that out because I was about to launch another horror show against it. But they've been... And the point about this horror show, of course, is to give you a sales pitch. By pretending or being disgusting, by saying things are very scary, they make you want to believe it's truth, irrespective of whether they have the power to do that. More than that, of course, it is actually a sales pitch as well. If you know an organisation is horrific, and was going to therefore burn truth upon our society, the temptation is to join it. It bigs up their share price, and that's it. It is bigging up their share price because it is making them think, oh, well, I better join this horror show. And it all becomes one great big sales pitch where you can't tell where reality at all is anymore. The joke, of course, is that something like Musk doesn't know because he can't program to save his life. And so he doesn't know either. So the people who are selling the horror show aren't the people who are designing the software. And don't know particularly what can be done, I often think. Now, I have no evidence of that. That's just my suspicion. I mean, Musk can't program, but I have no real knowledge of that, except my 2 programmer brothers. Anyway, but that wider idea that horror and truth have become synonymous is, of course, very much seen in the way that mobs can be whipped up, and they're very whipped up against immigrants who, a generation now, nearly, of propaganda has confused with paedophiles, although actually paedophiles tend to, now here again, here's the left-wing horror show coming up, tend to be the very wealthy and tend to be linked to government. There you go, left-wing horror show. That's my version of reality. You see, it's all slipped into horror show. In my particular version, that isn't true. But in the other set of horror shows, and perhaps we ought to define left-wing and right-wing, if they got definitions these days, by which particular horror show do you tune into every night? Because the right-wing one would say that migrants and sex abuse are the same thing, which is, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's clear nonsense. But I don't read those sorts of books. I don't look at those sort of articles. I assume that they're just lies, because I'm not part of that particular horror show. So that all you need is 1 or 2 disgusting videos of violent acts that no doubt were created and no doubt should have been punished. And bingo, you've got a mob and a riot, led, of course, by wife abusers and paedophiles, ironically. And now, again, here I'm showing my bias, but there was a lovely figure about the number of people they'd arrested in the Southampton riot who'd also been up for charges of battery. Left-wing horror show coming through there. But the entire politics, the entire way you think about where you are on that thing that gets called the political spectrum, has become which set of horror stories do you identify? More than that, the entire way now sales pitches are done are in terms of horror shows and our reaction to them. It's become the way we think about reality. Either horror shows or just straight fiction that defies probability. But it's horror shows, I think, that is the one that worries me most, because it makes any actual politics invisible. It makes the very possibility of politics improbable. It makes any ability to solve the kind of horror shows that I actually do think are genuinely unwinding. I mean, and that's based on the Met Office, that's based on impassionate science, and it's the one about in the environment. Absolutely unsolvable, because it can't punch its weight. It can't be there apparent as the real horror show until it is far too late to do anything about it. So I think my eventual answer to that is not that, oh, isn't this awful? We must need wake up from this endless horror. Because I'm not sure that we can. Because I actually think there is a horror show behind it all. It's just not the ones we're being told about. It's the horror show as the environment slips beyond any possibility for human civilization. That's pretty horrible. And that's where the facts end up. And if you want to dismiss that horror show as mere fiction, then you really have accepted the horror, the kind of horror that you want to do, has become reality. And the postmodern condition has got you in the end.